I know it's a little bit late for a Saturday night, so thank you all for being here. Alhamdulillah, my name is William White. I'm the Director of Operations for the Council on American Islamic Relations, Houston chapter. And if you get winded saying that, you can just say CARE, Alhamdulillah. So CARE is the largest Muslim civil rights nonprofit group in the country. Alhamdulillah, we are community sourced, community funded, and community operated. So we have a volunteer board, local staff, as well as volunteers from across the city, alhamdulillah. Today, inshallah, we're going to be explaining our role as a civil rights organization and what that work entails, and what your rights are as American Muslims, inshallah. Oh God, it's happening again. Alian. Can you hit resume slideshow, please? Thank you. Okay, while that loads. Just a little bit about myself. Alhamdulillah, my name is William White, like I said. This masjid is very important to me. I got married right here. Imam Ahmed is my go-to, brother Imam, mashallah. So this community, alhamdulillah, means a lot to me. And what that means for everyone here is it's my job as the Director of Operations at CARE to ensure that everyone here has their rights and that no one's rights are being infringed upon. Just like we have our rights from Allah in our daily interactions and business between our spouses, between our children, we also have our rights derived from the Constitution. So CARE is, like I said, the largest Muslim civil rights nonprofit group in the country. Our mission is to enhance the understanding of Islam. First and foremost, we don't want to be mischaracterized in the media and on movies and TV. But also, we want to protect civil rights of American Muslims. We also want to empower American Muslims to, inshallah, grow our community and grow our activity as an American community. And I want to just add an asterisk to this. We're not a partisan organization. So our sole aim is to encourage the American Muslim community to be an American Muslim community. We don't take any side or stance on any matter unless it infringes upon our rights. So to that end, I don't care who you vote for, as long as you go vote. Early voting is going on right now, so inshallah, please go vote. So living the mission, what does it mean to be active in CARE? First of all, enhance the understanding of Islam. Like I said, we want to make sure that our religion is not being tarnished in the media and that we have an accurate portrayal of our community. As well, protect civil rights. What are some things that we've done recently? Alhamdulillah, we just sued the state. Actually, this gentleman here was the one filing motions on that against the BDS clause. BDS, of course, is boycott, divestment, and sanctions. It's a very popular movement for pro-Palestine activists. The state of Texas decided they were going to shut that down by creating a clause that if you wanted to have a contract with the state of Texas, you would have to sign something saying, I will not boycott, divest, or sanction with my own money, Israel. Goes against freedom of speech. Alhamdulillah, we won the first time with Sister Bahia Amawi, and just this past time, we were granted a temporary injunction while the law is looked at further. So, and you know, those were two judges from across the political spectrum, one an Obama appointee, another a Bush appointee, if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, it's very clear that this law violates the civil rights of our American Muslim community and of the broader community at large. And alhamdulillah, CARE was at the forefront for fighting that fight. Promote justice. You know, in the last administration, we had a ton of problems with children being locked up by ICE in prisons. It's still ongoing. Don't want to turn a blind eye to that. But also amplifying causes that we care about. You know, I keep saying Palestine. John just came from a dinner on Kashmir. So, you know, we're here to learn from our community what are some things that we care about. Of course, criminal rights or criminal justice reform, matters on Palestine, on Kashmir, on Syria. These are all things that our community cares about deeply, so we want to amplify those matters to our elected officials, inshallah. And also empower American Muslims. There's a ton on that screen, but I'm just going to say, I encourage everyone here, inshallah, if you haven't already, please, please, please go vote. We have an active program called My Muslim Vote. Inshallah, if you'd like to sign up for that, please see me in the back, and we can talk more about that. But essentially, I want everyone in this room and our families to go and vote, inshallah. Just a little bit about CARE. We were founded in 1994. This is after the Oklahoma City bombings. After the Oklahoma City bombings, we had already seen, despite the suspect in that case being a white male, the Muslim community received a brunt of the law enforcement activities after that case, unfortunately. And so CARE was created out of that as a response to that harsh treatment by law enforcement across the country in our masajid. And we continued through the 90s trying to counter depictions of the Muslim community in Hollywood and other Islamophobic incidents. Most famously, we sued Nike in the late 90s for having a law on their Nike shoes. Of course, very defamatory towards us. How dare you put a law on your shoe? We won that case, and we actually got the shoe pulled off the shelves. So that was a huge feat for us. And I keep talking about your rights, your rights, your rights. So just so that we understand, as Muslims, we derive our rights from the Quran and the Sunnah, of course. As Americans, we derive our rights from the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So first of which is our freedom of speech. That's freedom of religion. That's what gives me the right to hold this microphone, and you all the right to be here in this masjid, in this musalla, alhamdulillah. Also the right to free press. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, you can thank this amendment for that. As well, we have our Fourth Amendment. This is very important once we go into John's topic of knowing your rights with law enforcement. So the Fourth Amendment essentially acts as a protection against unwanted search and seizure from law enforcement. So if you don't consent to a search, which John will tell you you never should, the Fourth Amendment guarantees that right, that you won't have to forfeit your home, your property, or your person to be searched. Finally, the Fifth Amendment, you have the right to remain silent with law enforcement or any government agency if you choose. You should always choose to remain silent with law enforcement. And if, God forbid, anyone here is ever charged on a crime, you don't have double jeopardy. And finally, the Sixth Amendment is you have the right to the speedy trial. Inshallah, no one here has to go through that process, but that is just one of our rights guaranteed to us. So just a disclaimer, I want to convey that this is not meant to act as an individualistic legal approach to anyone. If you have legal questions, please contact us independently and don't think that this is your basis to defeat your case or anything like that. And yeah, inshallah. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to my board chair. John Floyd is a 25-year veteran of the criminal defense, as a criminal defense attorney, alhamdulillah. He's been with CARE for 20 years now. He's been taking on pro bono cases. He's surpassed hundreds and hundreds of cases for CARE, defending the rights of Muslims that are profiled and stopped by law enforcement. So alhamdulillah, I'm very honored that he's not only on my board, but is also my board chair and is willing to give up his time to be with us tonight. So I'll turn it over to him. Jazakumullah khair.
Thank you, bro. Which is yours?
Just to go through it.
Assalamu alaikum. Before I begin tonight, Brother Billy, first of all, I do want to just take a moment to welcome my dear brother Billy to CARE Houston. He has just joined about a month ago and has hit the ground running, and inshallah, I'm certain that our chapter and the community are going to benefit from his hard work and endeavors. So please keep him in your du'as. He's an incredible young man who actually went through the CARE intern program, was a volunteer at CARE. He graduated from U of H and went to go work with Austin, CARE Austin, and then some with DFW. And now, alhamdulillah, he's back in Houston. So welcome back, Billy. Another thing I want to bring up is, as Billy mentioned, I was at the Indian Muslim Americans presentation tonight. And quite honestly, it's very hard to tear myself away from that presentation. The oppression and violence that our Muslim brothers and sisters are facing in India, Palestine, China, and so many other places. It's truly heartbreaking. It is a war crime. And one of the reasons I was driving over here, thought to myself, it's so important that we all know our rights, so that this country does not come to that. Right? America is a great place to have your free religious expression. It's a great place to be a Muslim, but we have to be on guard because there are enemies in our midst who will take our freedoms away if we're not careful. So please keep your brothers and sisters around the world that are living in violence and oppression in your du'as. Inshallah, we'll keep the fight up for all of them, keep them in our prayers. Okay, so moving on. We're going to have an overview, and I'm going to step here so I can read some of this. The overview is we'll go through kind of stops and arrest when you're contacted by law enforcement, searches and warrants. We're going to talk a little bit about the watch list and some additional information about what to do when you're contacted by law enforcement when you're either leaving or entering the country. The first part is really my passion. As Billy said, I've been practicing criminal defense work for 27 years now, Billy. I'm board certified in criminal law, and so this is really what brought me to CARE. Shortly after 9/11, I was approached because the FBI was doing a massive dragnet throughout the Muslim community. There was a policy at the time to interview almost every Muslim male, predominantly, between the ages of 18 and 24 after 9/11. And I was approached by the ACLU at the time in conjunction with CARE, asking that we volunteer some time to represent individuals who have been profiled illegally for this volunteer interview program, is what they called it. And so I still remember my very first client. For those of you who don't know me, I accepted Islam in 1994. And I was shocked to see what was going on after 9/11, how the government, and you remember well, you probably don't. The president at that point basically proclaimed, you're either with us or against us. I know a lot of you guys are out there are old enough to remember that. And created this discrimination and profiling from the top down. Because, the president thought the Muslim community was suspicious, and it just filtered down all the way through to local law enforcement. And so we had just this surge of discriminatory and prejudiced requests for interviews for Muslim men. And it was actually causing a chilling effect in our masjids. And so I became involved, and I still remember the very first client I represented. He was targeted by the FBI because he was he was a Muslim, he had a Muslim name. Someone thought he was suspicious, and so they tipped him off to the FBI. The sad part of the story is this young brother, mid-20s, suffered profound mental illness. He was sacking groceries at a Kroger's for a living. And someone thought that he was suspicious. And when I met him, I was shocked that here we are, we have the FBI profiling this young man who's done absolutely nothing wrong. His family was in tears when they came to our offices because what has he done? He's done nothing but excel the best he could. Right? He had a job, the family was proud of him, and here he was being targeted by an FBI agent. So I volunteered to do this interview, and we met with him, we met with the family, and the way CARE works is we go through a screening process, and we sit down, and it's usually we have to interview the client, and at the end of this interview, I was incensed. Because this brother, all he really wanted to do was sack groceries. Right? He was happy doing that. And on the other side of the table was an FBI agent who was an ex-Marine who had been deployed in the Middle East, who had very negative opinions of Muslims, of Islam, and of the white convert and the Pakistani Muslim lawyers that were volunteering to represent him. And I never will forget, halfway through the interview, we kept telling this young brother, don't answer that. And the FBI agent just got upset. Next question, don't answer that. I mean, they're asking questions about how do you feel about a hadith? Or which masjid do you go to? Who do you pray with? These are all prohibited questions, right? But the FBI wants to ask all these questions so they can build their database. So finally, the FBI agent, after about 5 or 6 of these questions, he looks at us and says, you know, you're lucky that we're even letting you guys in the room, because he doesn't have a right to an attorney. I mean, this is America, right? Everyone has a right to an attorney, especially when they're being questioned by FBI. And this guy knew it. He had just lost his cool. And all I could think, and literally, we almost came, well, I didn't come. My partner was with me, almost came to blows with this FBI agent over this table. And they're banging on the table. And I remember thinking, wallahi, you know, if we weren't here, how would they have treated this young man? Right? What would they have convinced him into confessing? What would they have tricked him into doing? And I was hooked at that point. I made a commitment to CARE and to our community that we would keep doing these, and we would keep defending these unlawful and these unconstitutional practices as long as we could. I didn't think I'd still be doing it, but almost 20 years later, Billy. And in Houston alone, in the Houston area, we've done hundreds of these interviews, to the point that everyone at the FBI knows who I am. They're soon going to know who you are, Billy. But what we have done is we've demonstrated to them that the Muslim community is not just going to take this. We're going to know our rights. We're going to know how to exercise them. And when it comes to it, there's lawyers that are professional, that know what they're going to do, and know what they're doing, who are going to prevent these abuses moving forward. And so we've been able to actually engender some respect from the FBI, at least some of them, at least when we're in the room. God knows what they say when we're outside the room. But at least when we're there, they know that we're serious and we're not going to take this. So that's kind of my background story. We'll get into, and it's important because I think moving forward you'll see why it's important, because there are some technical things here that you really need to know. So as Billy was saying, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights set out a whole series of protections, including freedom of speech, that's covered by the First Amendment. That is what allows all of us to have free exercise of religion, free speech, freedom of association, the right to assemble, and the right to petition. 3 of those are directly on point on what we do in our masjids every day, right? We have freedom to free exercise of religion, we have a right to assemble, and we have free speech, all of which are protected by the Constitution. Under the Fourth Amendment, we have protections against unwarranted searches and seizures, except with warrants and probable cause. And we can talk about that some more. The Fifth Amendment, very important, and something we advise everyone to understand and to exercise. Everyone in the country, citizen, non-citizen, if your feet are in the country and you've been admitted into the country, you have a right to all these rights, but especially you have a right to remain silent, right against double jeopardy, and due process. There's a joke, of course, that always says that while we have the right to remain silent, a lot of people don't have the ability to, right? And so understanding that right is very important. And of course, we have the right to speedy trial, a right to confront our accusers, and a right to counsel. And that's what that FBI agent didn't seem to grasp, right? Whenever you're dealing with law enforcement, being questioned by law enforcement, being arrested, being prosecuted, you have a right to counsel at every significant stage in the process. And you should assert that right. Okay, so what, did I hear something? Double jeopardy. So double jeopardy is what it means is that you cannot be put to trial twice for the same offense. And so if charges are brought against you and for a specific crime and you win that trial and you're found not guilty, the government can never bring charges again against you. So inshallah, none of us have to know that. But it just keeps you from being tried over and over and over by the government. If the government questions you, it's very important that you understand your rights. You be careful what you say, and that you understand that anything that you say can be used against you. And that applies to in criminal court or an immigration court or even in a civil case. What people don't understand a lot of times is what comes out of your mouth as a declarant can be used against you. That's an exception to the hearsay rule. That's a bunch of kind of legal gobbledygook, but what it means is that if you say it, it can be used against you. If someone else says it about you, that's hearsay. They can't use it against you. But if it comes out of your mouth, it can be used against you. That's why it's so important to not talk to law enforcement without having an attorney present, because they will twist and kind of use what you say against you to fit their narrative. Yeah, I know. So it's very, very frustrating, brother, because as many times as I've given this presentation, I know that you've seen it at least 3 or 4 times. Right? You know your rights, and I know that you know how to enforce your rights. But there's a certain mentality. And not only, I mean, it's especially, and law enforcement understands this, a lot of our Muslim community is an immigrant community, and they come from countries where you don't have these rights. And in fact, if you don't cooperate with law enforcement, sometimes, they'll make you cooperate, right? And so not only that, they're immigrants to the country, and even some of our citizens who are born here, they think, if I don't talk, it's going to look like I'm trying to hide something or I've done something wrong. And so it is very difficult. The way I try to encourage people to look at it is that as Muslims and as justice runs through our deen, right? We should be proud to exercise our rights. And if that doesn't do it for you, all the other people do. I've seen pastors of big mega churches, right? If the FBI or the IRS wants to come in and ask questions, what's the first thing they do? We'd love to help you. God bless you. We'd love to help you, but we're not going to talk to you without our lawyer being present and without a subpoena. Everyone who has money, who's been educated, about their rights, who's professional, who's had experience with lawyers before, they all know this. And they're not ashamed of it. That's why you see, look at the cast of characters that's being called before all these committees now to investigate January 6th, right? They know what they're doing. None of them are going to talk without having their attorney present or without having a subpoena. And so we have to get past this thing about looking guilty or looking like we have something to hide. If you go to an FBI training, and I've read a lot of these materials, I've attended a lot of continuing legal education seminars, they train law enforcement about that. That's one of their techniques. They know that most people don't want to look guilty, don't want to look like they have something to hide, and they'll actually say that. They'll say, well, you don't need a lawyer if you haven't done anything wrong or you don't have anything to hide. So that is just a psychology that we have to get past. And the way we do that is to understand our rights and to be proud to exercise them and to show law enforcement that we know our rights and that we're going to exercise them. We're going to exercise them professionally and with courtesy. But, people who just talk, the FBI is hoping you're going to talk to them, because they think you don't know your rights. So please, make sure you exercise them. This applies to asylum seekers and asylees. We're seeing a lot more of this now because a lot of our citizens now have become more acquainted with the FBI techniques and are not so easily interviewed. A lot of our community now knows, if FBI comes, that you should probably enforce your rights to remain silent and request an attorney. But where they go after people are people who are coming into the country, right? And the FBI, they will say they don't do it, but they actually work with Immigration, Customs, and Border Patrol. And we see many times where applications for asylum or for a change of status, all of a sudden someone's getting a request for an FBI interview. And so they can, and they do, get out to review some of the things that you may have said if someone is applying for a change of immigration status or applying for asylum. And they'll get out and try to ask you questions, because again, right, they know that you want those benefits. You want to have your status changed. You want to be allowed to remain in the country. And so they'll use that as a tool to get people to talk. The thing is that your rights, if you or anyone you know is in that situation, you still have the same constitutional rights as anyone else. And you can just politely say, I'd be glad to help you. I've done nothing wrong, but I'm not going to talk to you without my lawyer being present. You're going to hear me say that many times, because I want everyone to be able to say that before you leave. I've done nothing wrong, I've got nothing to hide, but I'm not going to talk to you without my lawyer being present. Thank you very much. So what kind of questions can law enforcement ask you? Well, this is actually which type of different agencies you may encounter. These are all agencies that have law enforcement authorization. And the reason that's important, there's something called 1001 false statements that most people don't realize this, but it is a federal felony, punishable up to 5 years in prison, to make a false statement to a federal agent in the course of an investigation. So a lot of times, if you are contacted by one of these guys, they all have that authority. And what they will try to do is ask you questions that are maybe embarrassing, maybe something you've done 20, 30 years ago, something that they can prove on paper, and you're like, why do I want to answer that question? If I admit to that, they're just going to keep harassing me. Any one of these agencies, if you make a false statement to an investigator or an agent from one of these agencies, even if you've done nothing wrong, they can get you just for making a false statement. So then again, that's why it's important not to talk to law enforcement without an attorney being present, because we will stop you from doing that, right? Here you go. Do you have to answer questions asked by law enforcement? Absolutely not. The founders of this country in the Constitution, even though it was a bunch of white men doing it for a bunch of white men, they were coming here in a large part to escape forced interrogations back in Great Britain and in some of the other countries where they would actually torture people, right, to try to get them to confess. And so the founders who wrote the Constitution and the Bill of Rights put this in there because they were very aware of the fact that, yeah, you torture someone, they're going to talk, right? And so they built this into the Constitution that everyone has a right to remain silent. This applies to citizens and non-citizens, as we said before. The way I like to say is what you heard earlier. If you've been allowed into the country and you've entered the country lawfully, well, even illegally, if your feet are on the ground and you're inside the country, you have your constitutional rights intact. So it doesn't apply just to citizens, and a lot of people don't understand that. And so if you have immigrants in your family or people who are out of status, they need to know as well that the constitutional rights that are given to citizens actually apply to them as well. If you're contacted by law enforcement, you do not have to answer any questions about your immigration status. In fact, it's much better that you do not until you have an attorney present for many reasons. And here's the thing about do not lie about your status. Is what we said before, right? Because they can charge you with a federal felony for lying about anything to an agent. Exceptions to the right to remain silent. There are, there are a few exceptions. And one is that if you are approached by law enforcement, especially if you're in a vehicle, you have to stop and identify yourself, show them that you have proof to have a driver's license. If you are non-citizens traveling through the airports or ports of entry, you may have to ask some questions, or if you don't, they'll send you back home. So that's kind of the exception to the right to remain silent. As far as citizens coming in, we get this a lot in our community, and sees this a lot, is harassment when they're entering into the country, being pulled to the side, and they start asking you questions, and they make you sit there for 2 or 3 hours trying to get you to answer questions. But the bottom line is you have the absolute right to remain silent when you're entering the country. All you have to prove, if you're a citizen when you enter the country, is that you are a U.S. citizen, and your passport is enough to do that. So we encourage people to just answer the questions that are kind of normal. You can answer where you went and what the purpose of your travel was, but outside of that, they shouldn't be asking you any other questions once they see your passport. And don't let them fool you. They will try to detain, especially our Muslim brothers and sisters, as they enter the country, and intimidate them and just make things inconvenient to get them to answer questions. Can you talk to a lawyer before answering any questions? Of course you can. You have a constitutional right to talk to an attorney before you answer any questions, and in fact, you should consult with an attorney before answering any questions, or particularly signing any documents. Don't ever sign anything until you've read it, understand it, and you've talked to a lawyer about it. It is our job to protect your rights, but we cannot do that without you first knowing what they are and asserting them. For example, the right to remain silent we were talking about earlier. The Supreme Court has said that that is a personal right. So what that means is it applies to the individual to assert. And so, even if I am representing a client, they travel, they come back into the country, if they voluntarily start talking, even though they're represented, even if I've told the agent that I'm representing that person before they come in, they can still try to confront the individual and ask questions. It's up to the individual to say, I'm not going to talk to you without a lawyer present. And once you do that, those are magic words. They have to stop asking you those questions. But you do have to assert your rights, otherwise you can waive them. Oh, did I just turn it off? Yeah. What if you speak to law enforcement anyway? So this is what we were talking about earlier. Anything you say to law enforcement can be used against you, can also be used against other. Keep in mind that lying to a government official is a crime, as we talked about before. So, those were kind of in some of the voluntary interactions. What if law enforcement comes to you or your business or your masjid and they want to ask for things? You still have a right to remain silent. You have a right to an attorney, and you should contact one immediately, especially if they come with a subpoena, a search warrant, or even an arrest warrant. And the third point is very appropriate. A lot of times law enforcement will come to individuals in their businesses or at their homes. We've seen it in our masjids as well. And they will ask for a voluntary disclosure of records. And so this is extremely important because the FBI is in the business of collecting data and sharing it with other government agencies. So it's very important that we don't let them come into our masjids, ask for our records, because all they're going to do is put everyone who goes to your masjid into a database, and they're going to start investigating all those people. And so we have to stop that. Every church in the country understands that. You think the Catholic Church, then when they show up, they want to see their records, they don't let them have a thing without it. No, none of them do. Even the big churches, they all were going to require law enforcement to have a subpoena. So don't release anything to law enforcement without a subpoena. If they show up wanting records, you should tell them what we talked about earlier. We've done nothing wrong. We're glad to cooperate. but we're not going to talk without a lawyer present, and we're not going to give you any access to our records without a subpoena. What if you're asked to meet with officers for an interview? So this is what's interesting, right? A lot of people feel like that if an FBI agent or if they're pulled over and an officer wants to ask them questions, they feel like they have to, right? And that was your question earlier as well. You can just straight up tell them that I have nothing to say, I've done nothing wrong, and I'm not going to answer your questions. It's really just having the fortitude to do it. Of course, you have a right to have an attorney present. You can set your own time and place if you choose to be interviewed with an attorney. And you can also ask them what kind of questions they're planning on asking. And more than that, if they start getting into areas that start making you feel uncomfortable, you can stop an interview at any point. And so that's why it's also important you remember the fact that false statements made to a law enforcement agent, especially a federal agent, false statements to a federal agent is a federal felony, can land you in prison for 5 years, right? So if they start getting into an area that makes you feel uncomfortable, rather than saying something just to get out of it, to make yourself look good, it's always best just to decline interview to begin with. So this has to do with when you're actually contacted by, this is more boots on the ground kind of law enforcement. Again, you're contacted by law enforcement on the street or in a traffic stop. You don't have to say anything. And in fact, and unless you are being detained, you can tell them I don't want to talk to you and walk away. It's as simple as that. If they detain you and place you under arrest, then they have to Mirandize you and a bunch of other things. But a lot of times, again, people don't feel comfortable walking away because they don't want to look guilty. And so they'll hang around and try to talk themselves out of it. But you do not have to say anything, and you can actually walk away. Never a good idea to run from law enforcement. They seem to get real excited about that. There's nothing they love more than a good chase. And they will chase you. They can, if there is reasonable suspicion for a detention, they can pat you down for their own safety to make sure you're not armed and dangerous. It's very important that you do not resist. Resisting a police officer can be as much as pulling your arm away. So if they put their hands on you and they say, you know, we're detaining you or we're arresting you until we figure out what's going on here, if you as much as jerk away, they can charge you with resisting arrest. So it's very important at that point just to comply, because you will have an opportunity once they're done doing whatever they do to get your lawyer and to take them to task if they've done it illegally. So don't resist. Any type of force and resistance to a lawful detention is resisting arrest. And like I said before, I've seen people who are actually charged. We've seen it at some protests who are just charged for resisting arrest just for simply pulling their arm away. So any force at all. What to do if law enforcement stops you in your car? So this is what Billy was talking about earlier. There's a really lengthy, it's pretty complex legal analysis that goes into all this, but law enforcement cannot stop you. They can stop you for traffic violation or if they have reasonable suspicion that a crime has occurred. That's enough to allow them to make a stop, okay? If they stop you either on traffic or because they have some kind of reasonable suspicion that you've committed some kind of crime, they will ask you if they can search your vehicle, right? They do it all the time. You have the absolute right to tell them no. Again, it's one of those things is whether or not you have the ability to do it, because a lot of people think, oh, if I don't let them search my car, they're going to detain me, they're going to give me a hard time. But the reality is that you should never give consent to allow them to search your vehicle, to allow them to search your home, to allow them to search your business without a lawyer present, period. Because why? Because it's in the Constitution, that's our rights, and we should exercise our rights. If an officer has probable cause to believe that there's criminal activity taking place, they can arrest you, If they have probable cause to believe there's criminal activity taking place, they can actually conduct a search without a warrant. But they have to have what they call articulable, meaning they have to be able to explain what the probable cause was that led them to believe that you were committing some type of offense before they can search without a warrant. Otherwise, all searches have to have a warrant accompanying. So don't let them, don't consent to allow for a search. It doesn't make any sense. If you are arrested, this is what you see on TV, right? You have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. You have a right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will appoint it to you. This is what a lot of people don't understand. Your Miranda rights only attach once you've actually been arrested. So that means you've been handcuffed and placed in custody. Up until that moment, your Miranda rights don't apply. So if they're just have some kind of suspicion that there's some kind of criminal activity occurred and they want to ask you questions, they can ask you all day long without giving you your Miranda rights. These only apply once you've been arrested, okay? A lot of people will complain after the fact, after they've talked to FBI, after they've talked to law enforcement, oh, they never read me my rights. Well, they don't have to. They know that, and you should too. The only time they have to read you these rights is after you're actually arrested. And you should exercise all these rights if you're arrested. If you're arrested, it's gone past probable cause, and you should absolutely remain silent. And remember that everything you can say can be used against you. You should say that you are not going to answer any questions and that you want to have an attorney present before you answer any questions. So this is kind of what I was talking about earlier when I started about what kind of got me involved with a lot of the voluntary interviews. Law enforcement is trained basically to use any tactic that they think is going to be useful in getting someone to talk. Sometimes they'll try to scare you. Sometimes they'll use threats against your family. Sometimes they'll just try to guilt you into it. You know, like, what, you've done nothing wrong, you got nothing to hide. Why do you need a lawyer? So they're trained to try to, I guess, judge an individual once they have kind of assess the situation to see which of these tactics may work. Sometimes they try all of them, right? They'll try intimidating, they'll try yelling, they'll even try lying to you. So the Supreme Court has actually said that it is lawful for law enforcement to lie during an investigation to get you to cooperate. And so even if they tell you, for example, a lot of times they'll say, oh, we just want to close this investigation. If you'll talk to us, we're going to wrap this thing up and this case will be closed. They can do that. They can mislead you. They can lie. They can do whatever they like to try to get you to speak to them. All right? You've seen this on TV where they do a good cop, bad cop kind of thing, or they may leave the room and come back, act like they're doing something. They're usually just going out and having a cup of coffee and then coming back. Yes. Yes, sir. It depends on what the situation. If you're arrested, yes, right? But if you are not under arrest, you have a right to leave at any point. Yes. So if you are detained, so if you're under arrest, yes, they can hold you for as long as it takes. If you're not under arrest, then you can leave. And so you tell them, you ask them straight up, am I under arrest? And they'll say no. Am I free to leave? They have to say yes, otherwise you're under arrest. And then you leave. But yes, you should assert your right to a lawyer first to shut down the interview process. Imam? Yes. Yes. I didn't want to point you out. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So you show them your passport, they have a couple questions like, all right, follow this.
Yeah.
At that point, when you're following that, do I still have the right to it? Or do I have to communicate?
And so is that kind of the same question you were asking? Yeah, so it gets kind of technical, right? Because there's a fiction involved when you're traveling. Until they've actually stamped, they used to stamp your passport, right? Now it's until they scan it and can let you in. Until you've actually been allowed into the country, even if you're in Houston and you've landed, until you've been admitted, you do not have a right to an attorney. But you don't have, even as a citizen. So for example, if you're pulled to the suspicious Muslim room, right? And they're asking you questions, and you refuse to answer their questions, and you say, I'm not going to answer any questions you have without my attorney being present. They will tell you, well, you don't have a right to an attorney. You haven't been admitted to the country yet. Legally, that is true. But you don't have to talk to them. And you don't have to talk. You can just say, well, that's great, you know. I'm not going to talk to you until my lawyer's present. And then it just goes in this circle, right? So the bottom line is as someone who is, especially U.S. citizens, all you have to do is show your passport. You don't have to answer any questions. Now, they will detain a lot of Muslims. I mean, I've been pulled off a plane. One day, Billy, you might have that pleasure. And so they do keep databases of people they want to question. They look at where you've traveled that they may think are suspicious countries. And so, yeah, they will pull you aside, but you do not have to answer any questions without them. So what we have seen is there's no time limit really. But what we see is that it's anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours, just kind of sweating you out to see if you're going to change your tune. What we've been advising people, especially people who have been harassed a lot, is that when you're leaving, if you will reach out to us and let us know that you've had this pattern of conduct when you're entering the country, we'll get you basically a letter of representation saying that we represent you and that you're not going to answer any questions without a lawyer. They can just laugh at it. They can say, you know, it still doesn't matter to us. But the reality is that there's a way we can turn the tables on them at that point, right? And so if they're still trying to ask questions, we ask people to start documenting their experience. It's really funny if you turn the table on the agents. When they're asking you questions, if you pull out your phone or a notepad and you start asking the agent, well, what's your name? Who's your supervisor? You know, and you start taking notes, and it does two things, right? It kind of intimidates them and lets them know you know your rights, but it also allows you to keep a record so that when you get through, you can let CARE know that you've had this experience, and then we start documenting it to see if we're having problems with individual agents. But the bottom line is that you do not have to answer any questions. We're seeing 2 hours sometimes that people are, and they'll say they're not doing it. No. And in fact, it becomes at that point, it almost becomes an arrest. That what they you know, that's called the government slow roll, right? They'll just, you know, let's go process his papers. So the bottom line is that when they do that, that's just another intimidation tactic that we talked about before. And and unfortunately, it works very well. We have a lot of, especially sisters when they're entering, and if they have children with them, they'll try pulling them to the side with this idea that they're going to make them wait forever, and they really can't. But it's that fear sometimes that gets people to cooperate and do the interview. They are not supposed to separate minors from one parent. So, meaning if you are a family and you have the parents together, then the children need to stay with the child. Unless someone's under arrest for a criminal charge, at that point they'll call it CPS. But outside of that, they're not supposed to separate the children from at least one parent. Okay? Tactics used by law enforcement. This is what we were talking about earlier. So you get an FBI agent. It comes and leaves this at your door. We see this all the time. Yeah, at least once a week we get these kinds of things because you are in no trouble, but we need to speak briefly. Please call me. I'm hoping by now everyone knows what to do in that situation. You call an attorney, you call CARE. We will call this guy and tell him to leave you alone. There's still this really wicked policy that has really been in place ever since 9/11 about just intelligence gathering. And sometimes when we're in a large hall doing this program, I'll ask people if either they themselves or anyone else has been contacted like this for one of these voluntary interviews, and at least half the room sometimes raises their hand. So don't feel embarrassed if something like this happens to you. This is discrimination, and so this is just a technique to try to get intelligence on the Muslim community. No matter what they say, they are still doing it. We see it all the time, and the reason they're still doing it because they're getting away with it, because people are not asserting their rights. So if you get a note like this, don't worry about it. You've probably done nothing wrong at all. We've done hundreds of these, and of the hundreds we've done, I would say that 98% of them, there's nothing there. Just someone has said, oh, that guy looks suspicious, or that sister said something on Facebook, or whatever it is. So they're really just looking for intelligence. And what's offensive to us about it is they don't do this to other communities. Right? We have all these right-wing white supremacists that are posting all kinds of crazy stuff on social media, and they never get a request for an interview. I mean, we have to chase down the FBI to respond to these white supremacists when they do stuff in the community. But they're coming to our people and for nothing. Literally, someone may say he looks funny, and they get an FBI interview. And the FBI agents will tell me, oh, John, we have to interview him. We got this policy. I got a stack of these interviews that I got to complete, and I don't get brownie points unless I check all these boxes. So they know what's going on too, that they're still doing it. They're gathering data. We were talking about this earlier. Don't allow law enforcement to search your home or your office or our places of worship without either a subpoena, like we were talking about earlier, or a search warrant. If you agree to allow them to come in and search, you've just waived your rights and they can come in and search. So don't do that. There's also this many things, just no chive. Have you seen the CARE thing, no chive for the FBI? Yeah, go ahead. So if a law enforcement officer or a federal agent comes to you and says that they have a search warrant, it's really not your job to verify it. If they have a search warrant and they tell you they have one, you have to comply. If we find out later on that they've falsified a search warrant, that's a lawsuit, and the officers are going to get fired, and they should actually be criminally prosecuted for official oppression. So that should not happen. What's more likely to happen is that an FBI agent or a police officer lies to a judge to get a bogus warrant, and they come in. But either way, if there's a warrant in your face, if they come with a piece of paper that's a warrant, you have to comply. If you don't comply, as we said earlier, if you do anything to resist, then you're going to get arrested for resisting arrest as well. They will not stop on that. If they have a warrant, they have to basically just knock on your door, tell you that they're there, they have a warrant. They can show it to you. They don't even have to do that. If they've got a warrant from a judge saying they can come into your home, they can come into your home, or they can come into your office. Yeah. You're right. You just have to be careful. But if someone's coming to you and they identify themselves as law enforcement, you don't really have much choice at that point. I understand what you're saying. There have been times where people have done that, where they've posed as law enforcement. Yes, you should ask for identification, and they should identify themselves. But if they're coming in if they think there's some kind of violent offense, or they think that the person has committed some crime and they have a warrant, they're not coming in real polite with ID, right? They're kicking in the door and they're coming in to do an arrest or a search. And so under those circumstances, you've seen, we had Breonna Taylor, we've seen a lot of other situations where there have been people who are completely not guilty, they've even gone to the wrong home and kicked in the door. If you show any signs of resistance, bad things can happen. So there's two different types of warrants. So you have, I guess, your normal search warrant, where they are supposed to come and actually knock on the door, say police, and then they kick in the door and come. I mean, there's really very little difference, right? But they are supposed to knock and announce themselves so you know who's there. The no-knock, they actually have to go to a magistrate or a judge and explain why knocking and announcing themselves would put law enforcement in danger. And so that's the difference. The problem is with the no-knocks, especially now that all these states have these very lax laws about guns and possessions of guns, everyone's got guns now. And so if a law enforcement, they come busting in your door or crawling through your window, things are at a real high tension point. And there are people who are shooting police, and there's police that are shooting back and killing people. There have been several instances. It doesn't just go one way. I mean, we've had several high-profile incidences of police actually shooting people who are like in bed, playing with their kids because they thought they saw something. But we've also seen several instances where police officers were shot because of this no-knock thing. So the no-knock is, it is allowed, it's still legal, especially in the state of Texas. We've had, I think, one city now in Texas that has banned the practice, but outside of that, and it's not Houston. They're trying to limit it in Sugar Land and wherever. In Texas, it's still allowed. During that last legislative session, we were advocating for legislation to try to ban this practice because it puts everyone in danger. But yeah, it's not, what's the real difference at the end of the day? And that's kind of my argument. It is, especially in like high-profile cases or drug cases, cases where they think the person has a violent history, they use it quite a bit in those kinds. All they got to do is tell a judge that this guy's got a criminal history or he's committed this really bad crime, and we think we're in danger, and they can get this warrant. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right, it's very messed up. Not only is it tragic for the occupants of the home, there was a woman in Fort Worth a few years ago. Remember, they had a warrant. It wasn't for anyone who was even in the home, and she was actually sitting in the living room playing with a child, and they shot her through a window. An officer started going through the window and thought that he saw something and shot her. It is very messed up. It is also incredibly burdensome on the system because it creates a distrust in law enforcement. Right? If they're killing our people, no one trusts them, and they become so militarized now that they're losing respect. But it also causes hundreds of millions of dollars in lawsuits that they have to pay out to people that come from us, the taxpayers, because they acted inappropriately. So it's very messed up. Yes? Because that's how they're trained. So that's the problem now, is that, so this is another thing that we were advocating for in this last legislative session. In the wake of all these police murders, the Breonna Taylor case, the George Floyd case, there's been several in Texas. There was legislation that would require officers to try to de-escalate first, right? That didn't pass because our governor is very pro-law enforcement, and we're nonpartisan, but he's very pro-law enforcement. He don't want to take that tool away from them. And so they are... Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. The problem is that most people in Texas don't yet. That's the real problem, right? There's also legislation that's been proposed to demilitarize the police so that they don't have these kinds of weapons, that they are not allowed to carry around these kinds of weapons. I mean, they're carrying around basically machine guns. They have these militarized vehicles that are almost like tanks. They have stun grenades. And so it is a situation, especially in our black and brown communities, that these communities they're almost occupied by law enforcement officers that have these kinds of tools. And so the best thing that we can do now is, if that's something that offends you, is to try to get involved in one of the groups or one of our actions when the legislature's in session, to try to pass these laws to stop that. Because right now, law enforcement has pretty much a free pass in most states, including Texas. So this is what we were talking about earlier. If law enforcement has a search warrant, they can enter. If not, they have to get your consent. Oh, that's where I was going with the no chai with the FBI. This is kind of a catchy thing that CARE National has done. The reason why we've used that particular phrase is because the FBI is also trained about the hospitality that Muslim culture brings with it to this country. And so for years, they would go to someone's home. I used to say an auntie would answer the door, would invite them in, sit them on the couch, get them biscuits and tea before they even started talking to them. I mean, an FBI knew this, and they would use hospitality, use the Muslim concept of hospitality to actually get inside the door. And so we started this campaign about no chai for the FBI, and we meant it because it was happening all over the country. They would go to someone's home. It was usually a sister that answered, a mother perhaps. They wanted to talk to the son, the husband. The wife would actually allow them to come into the house, make them tea, give them food, while they called the husband to come home so they could ask him questions. So we're serious about it. It sounds funny, but no chai for the FBI. We don't allow them into our door. So if they come to the door and they identify themselves and they say they want to ask some questions, do not let them in. There's no reason that they should come into your home. There's no reason they should come into your business. There's no reason that they should come into your masjid without a warrant, period. And so we encourage everyone to be polite and to tell them, no, thank you. I won't talk to you without my lawyer being present, and just shut the door. Because they will keep talking to you. They will not leave. They will even try to step in. I used to joke, and I got in trouble for this at a big national convention once, but I say, the FBI, in this regard, they're like cockroaches, right? Once they get into your house, it's very hard to get rid of them. And so don't let them in the door. Once they get in, they're hard to get rid of. Because they'll make you feel guilty and they won't leave. And they'll just keep trying to ask you questions. So no chai for the FBI. That's something we all can remember, right? This is talking about arrest warrants. We've kind of talked about this a little bit. There are two types of warrants. One's a search warrant. It allows them to come in and look for specific things. A judge will, and you won't see all this, but a judge will basically give them limitations about what they can look for and what they can seize, and that's all they can do when they come in. And so they can come in and look for specific things and specific items. What's interesting about a search warrant is that many search warrants don't have an arrest warrant with them. And so they can come and knock on your door. They've got a search warrant. Everyone's already assumes that they're going to be arrested as well, right? But they have to have an arrest warrant if they're going to arrest you. If it's just a search warrant, all they can do is seize and look for and seize what a judge has told them to look for and seize. You can stay in the home and watch them. You can leave. A lot of times people, I've given advice to people before who could not stop themselves from talking, is they will say, well, just leave. Go outside, stand on the front porch. If you can't keep your mouth shut because of what they're doing, and it may lead to an escalating situation, it's best just to walk out. If they have a search warrant, they're not going to leave anyways. If they have an arrest warrant, it allows them to take you into custody. What's interesting here is that an arrest warrant also does not allow them to search. So just like a search warrant doesn't allow them to arrest, an arrest warrant doesn't allow them to search. And so if they have a warrant that is allowing them to arrest you, if you walk outside the front door, they can't come into your home. right? Because it's only an arrest report. And this is just kind of talking about what a warrant looks like. You may see something that looks something like this. It's a document that's signed by a judge or a magistrate. And same thing with an arrest warrant. It looks very similar. It just says that someone is being arrested for a particular crime, and it's also signed by a judge. So they can't search or arrest without an order from a judge. This is going back to consent, okay? We always advise people, number one, not to answer any questions without a lawyer being present, but also do not consent to a search of your home or your office or your masjid. If it's in your home, a roommate or any other individual that a law enforcement officer reasonably believes has authority to consent can actually give consent to search. So husband and wife, for example, if they're looking for something that the husband's done and they have a warrant to search the house, or they don't even need a warrant. They come to the house and they want to search. If the wife gives consent, it's on. Anyone who has the ability to give consent or appears to have the ability to give consent can give consent to a search. So it's very important that you give your family all this advice as well, and your friends, especially if they're staying with you. Same thing with an office situation. One thing you ought to know is that your office at your place of employment, unless you own your place of employment, unless you are the business owner, your employer can actually give consent to search your office. Right? You have no expectation of privacy to your office at your place of employment unless you own that place. Same thing with your laptops, like your business laptops, for example. You have no expectation of privacy in those items, your laptops, your phones, and FBI can call your job and say, hey, can we search that? And they can say yes. So that's just something you should know. Same thing applies to we haven't talked about this, but do not allow them to search your cell phones or your laptops without a warrant. What you should do if officers come to your home, I guess we've already talked about this, right? The best thing to do is to step outside, close the door behind you, and ask to see a warrant. If they don't have a warrant, tell them you're not going to allow them to come in, and you're not going to talk to them without a lawyer being present. If they do have a warrant, then you do not have to consent. So there's a trick. Sometimes there is actually a defect in a warrant that makes it illegal. And if people say, well, it's okay, you can come on in. If you consent, even if they have a warrant, you've just waived your rights. So never consent, even if they have a warrant. You just allow them to come in. You understand what I'm saying? So if they show up with the warrant, you have to let them in. But you don't consent to the search. It's just like a fiction, right? So you allow them in, but you just remain silent. Because if you say, if they come to your door and say, hey, can I search? And they have a warrant in their pocket and you don't know and you let them in, even if the warrant's bad and we would have got it thrown out in court, the consent is just basically waived all your rights. Yeah. So that's why we don't want them to come inside. Uh-huh. Right. So you say, I do not consent to search. They still have a warrant. They say, too bad we have a warrant. And then you're kind of stuck out at that point. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's important that you understand your rights, right? Because if you understand that you have a right to either allow them to come in or not, and you tell them you do not have consent to come into the home, then they have to respect that, right? They cannot come into the home. If they break that rule and they search without a warrant and without consent, as soon as they leave, you call us, and we can, or a criminal lawyer or some other lawyer, and we can file a motion to suppress everything that if they break the rules, we can throw all that evidence out of court. Billy will give you all of our contact information, but yes, you can always call us, especially if you're in a situation where they're coming to your door? So that's a good question. The masjid is a public place. We invite people to come in, right? What we don't allow them to do is come in and ask questions or to search. In fact, we should do just the opposite. All the other religious institutions would do the same. And so we don't allow them to come in and search, for example, right? If you know, alhamdulillah, if an FBI agent wants to come in and take shahada and pray, then, you know, we're good. But if they're coming in to search or they're coming in to do interviews, then they need to be out. And that's a lot of times that comes to leadership at that point to enforce that. Because we should not be allowing them to come into in my opinion and CARE's opinion, we should not be allowing law enforcement to infiltrate our masjids. No other religious entity in the country does this, and neither should we. Right. Yes. 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 And so this is one of our, if you want to see Billy get mad, this is one of the things that it is creeping into our community. We have a lot of leaders in our community that feel like they have to ingratiate themselves to FBI or to law enforcement, and they will allow them to do things that they're not required to do. I've seen, and this is a couple decades ago, I saw one of our religious leaders actually give records and give lists of from their masjid, and so this does happen. So the difference really is that if we invite them, let's say you're having a community event, Imam, and you're inviting everyone in the community and you want them here, that's okay. You know, that's fine. That's just community outreach. Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So this is something that we have been pushing back against, well, it's CARE in particular has been pushing against for the last 20 years, right? Because there is this mentality among some of our leaders that they feel like that they need to, as I said earlier, to ingratiate themselves with the authorities. They get their picture taken with them, it makes them feel important. No, I got ties to the FBI and it makes me important. It's really just the opposite, right? The more ingratiated you are with law enforcement and with the FBI, the more exposed you are. Because then, you know, people start having tea with them or they start having coffee with them and they can't stop. You know, it just starts spinning out of control. We have community leaders now who are advising people to go and talk to the FBI without an attorney. And yes, and we are very cognizant of that and we know who they are because a lot of times the clients will come to us after they've already been meeting with the FBI. And we're like, well, why do you do that? And they'll say, well, so-and-so told us to do it. So the FBI actually calls, and this kind of gets into some of the weeds, but the FBI will call some of our leaders and say, I want to talk to this guy. Can you reach out to him and have him talk to me? And some of our leaders will do that. and it's extremely dangerous to the community in general, but also to the individual that they're trying to interview. Because if you have your spiritual leader or a leader in the community giving advice to go talk to them, especially some of our immigrants in the community who really are just not educated on their rights, they can go in and get themselves into a lot of trouble, and it's happened. And it is one of the things that gets us red hot mad, because we have talked to these leaders in our community, and they assure us when we're sitting at a round table without the FBI there that they're not doing it, but they're still doing it. And so this is something that as we educate the community, you know, inshallah, I don't know how to stop it. We've been trying to stop it for 20 years. Right. Yeah. 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 Yes. Yes.
And then you know the hospital, you know the sheriff, and I think I've seen it all.
So there is no objection to reaching out and meeting with them. There's no objection to inviting them into an open house, right? There's no objection at all if someone in our community has been the victim of a crime, calling the police or the FBI. The objection is when the FBI or even some of our local police, when they're trying to interview somebody in an investigation, us talking to them without a lawyer, or our sheikhs or our religious leaders or our prominent citizens encouraging them to talk without an attorney. That's where it gets dangerous. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. Yeah.
They misunderstood what you said. That can be used against you.
Yeah.
So, me personally,
Yeah. No. And I join in that sentiment. That's why they always come in two, by the way, because they witness for each other, right? And so they'll each have reports saying that this guy lied. Then you have two agents saying they lied when maybe you didn't lie. And so that's what another reason to never start down that path to begin with. And so it's a fine line. I mean, we do want to be involved with the community. We want to have resources also. I mean, when we had just recently, 2 weeks ago, we had these white supremacist racists putting all these pamphlets out around the community. We turned the tables on them. We reported to these same guys that have been profiling our community. We filed a report with them saying, now you go do something. Because I told them, I said, look, man, you guys have been interviewing us for nothing. And here we got flyers with people threatening violence. And you better do something about it. And so we can report things to law enforcement. We can complain to law enforcement. But we should not be trying to ingratiate ourselves with them, because nothing good comes of it. No one else does it. Well, there are some people who do it. I mean, it's usually like snitches and people in the drug business. The worst thing that we can have is our brothers and sisters that we are praying beside working for the FBI, and that's happened as well. And so the way we stop all of that, and the pressure to do all of that, is we don't talk to them at all without an attorney being present. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I mean, it's the same thing. It's pretty much the same group of folks, too, that are passing out these flyers. We got gun nuts and white supremacists that are allowed to rush into the Capitol building, and people die, and our Capitol is actually, defaced and defamed, and nothing happens for those folks. Most of those people are getting away with misdemeanors, right? The Muslim community, on the other hand, if we make a false statement about something we did 20 years ago, they'll file a felony against you. So it's important that we know our rights so we don't get into that trap, right? So let's get back to this. If they do come to your home, whether they have a warrant or not, If they have a warrant, you have to let them in. If they don't have a warrant, do not consent. Step outside, shut the door, don't let them in. And contact an attorney immediately. In fact, if they are at your door and they won't leave, call us. We can put us on the cell phone. We'll tell them to leave, and they do. So just know you have the right to refuse to talk. Know you have the right not to let them in the house, and make sure you exercise that right. Yeah, we're going to give you the hotline. Billy's going to, yeah. We'll get you all the information at the end of the slide. Alhamdulillah. We're glad to be there too. So here's the thing. If they do not have a warrant, you do not have to consent to a search. We all know that now, right? You do not have to answer any of their questions. This is the beautiful thing, is they cannot punish you for refusing to cooperate, right? So if you refuse to answer their questions, you cannot be prosecuted for that. There's nothing they can, in fact, if you refuse to answer their questions and later on you are charged with something, they can't even bring the fact up that you exercised your rights. You know, the lawyer will keep that out of court. So they cannot use the fact that you refuse to talk to them, that you exercise your rights to refute under the Fifth Amendment, or that you exercise your right to an attorney. They cannot use that against you in court at all. And so it's always better to do that, because if you do something that they think is a false statement or a misstatement or a lie, they can prosecute you for that. So there's really no benefit in talking to them without a lawyer, right? What to say if they don't have a search warrant, but they search anyway. This is what our sister here was asking earlier, right? If they search anyways and they don't have a warrant and they don't have consent, then we can actually file a motion later on and have all that evidence thrown out of court. It's against the Constitution. They call it the fruit of the poisonous tree. So if they violate the Constitution and search your home or your office, anything that they do without a warrant or without consent is excludable. They can't use it in court. We can also then file complaints against the agents, against the officers. In some cases, you can even file lawsuits against them for violating your constitutional rights. If they don't have a warrant, you say, I do not consent to search. You call a lawyer immediately. You can actually videotape officers when they're conducting a stop. If they're coming to your door, it's not always. Sometimes it does escalate things a little bit, but you can definitely videotape them. If you're in a public space, you can videotape an officer violating someone else's rights. And in fact, that's why we are now people who look like Billy and I, right? A lot of people in our community are just shocked, right, that the law enforcement has been violating people's rights all these years. And it wasn't until the cell phone with the video camera and social media to expose all this is exposing that, yes, it actually does happen, right? And everyone knew it did all along, but no one cared. And now that it's staring you in the face, you can't deny it. It happens all the time. Contact your lawyer. Also, this is what we're talking about when you're entering the country. If you start trying to get officers' names and their identification, their badge numbers, their contact information, ask to speak to a supervisor, it changes the dynamic. Start documenting everything you can, so if they do break your constitutional rights, that we can get that information and then do something about it, all right? Here we go with the airports. So if you're a U.S. citizen, if you are at the airport, and this is kind of confusing. What this is really saying, I think, is at the border, is a U.S. citizen has a right to an attorney. As we said before, that only applies once you've been entered into the country, once you've been admitted. The reality is that you do not have to answer any questions before you've been admitted without a lawyer. And the same thing applies with non-citizens on this next point. You do not have a right to an attorney to be inspected either personally or your luggage or your laptops or your phones. you have no expectation of privacy when you're entering the country. And so they can actually search all of those things without your consent prior to being admitted to the country. Once you've been admitted, all your rights attach. But I always tell people, think about your phone and your laptop as like a container, right? It's just like when a container enters the country, they can search it, they can search your phones, and they can search your laptops. And in fact, we advise people, if you're doctors or you have personal information on your phones or on your laptops, sometimes it's better just to ship them separately because they get through without getting searched. Because they don't know what you look like and they don't know your name. So, you do have a right to an attorney if you're asking any questions other than your immigration status. And so you have to, that's really all you have to say, whether you're a citizen or non-citizen, all you have to do is answer questions about your immigration status. Law enforcement has a right to determine whether you have right to or permission to enter. So that only really applies to non-citizens. If you're a U.S. citizen, they have to let you in. Once you prove up who you are, they have to let you in. They're going to let you in. They may make you suffer a little bit while you wait. This applies to electronic devices, what I was just saying before. They have a right to search your laptops and your cell phones upon entry. We advise people to not give law enforcement your passwords. You do not have to give them your password. You do not have to allow them, you do not do anything to help them search your phones or your laptops. But they do have a right to seize them and then look through them if they choose before you enter. Yes, and so we actually encourage people when you're traveling, before you come back in, to disable the Face ID. Good point, Emma. So that's something that's important. Disable the Face ID. We encourage the same thing when people are going out to protest even, because we've seen law enforcement, even at like the George Floyd protest, taking people's phones who are under arrest and putting them on their face. And so disable the Face ID password component when you enter the country. And do not share your password. They can seize it, but then they're going to have to open it on their own. If you give them your password, you just consented for them to search your phone. So this is one of the things that really, when we first started doing these voluntary interview, when they were conducting all the voluntary interviews, there's actually a DOJ policy, it dates back to the Clinton administration, that says that they cannot ask about religious affiliation, whether you're Sunni or Shia, what you think about a particular hadith, which masjid you go to, who prays with you. They're not allowed to answer. Those are all constitutionally protected areas that they're not supposed to get into. But they do. And so do not answer any of these questions. Because what ends up happening, and we saw it, especially in the years after 9/11, is if you talk to them and you tell them your brothers or your sisters who go to the masjid, and they go and talk to those people and they tell, pretty soon everyone in the community gets interviewed. And so in order to stop that, don't answer any of these questions. If you're a non-citizen and you're arrested by immigration officers, this is what we were talking about earlier. If you have children, you can ask for a family member or a friend to pick them up, unless they're going to reject the whole family. If they're going to take someone into custody, they will look for a family member or someone to take the children. If they don't have one, they'll call CPS. And so it's important that if you're traveling, if you think you're going to have these kinds of problems, you need to travel with both parents so that one of them can stay with the child or the children. Remember, you have the rights, even if you are a non-U.S. citizen, you have a right to remain silent, you have a right to at least not to speak to them without an attorney present, and you have a right not to sign any papers without waiving your rights. This is what's, a lot of times when people are entering the country and they're non-citizens, they feel like they're intimidated and they're being forced to leave, and they'll sign these documents agreeing to either removal or deportation. And that causes all kinds of problems because there's like waiting periods before you can apply to come back and all that. So you should never, if they're going to reject you or not admit you to the country or they're going to deport you, you don't have to sign anything to do that. They can do that without your permission. So don't sign any paperwork without an attorney looking at it and giving you advice. Of course, you can also claim asylum if you have any of the permissible grounds for asylum. Remember, the primary job of immigration officials is enforcement, and they may or may not advise you of your rights. Remember, we have to be educated about our rights. They don't have to tell us anything about it. We can, if we're not educated, we can waive them. What to do if you've been added to a watch list? Contact a lawyer, contact CARE. You can actually, we can start doing things to dig into some of the records, and basically what happens is you can be subjected to extra scrutiny at airports and ports of entry, and you may be contacted by the FBI or placed on a watch list. So this happens a lot, right? There's a lot of people in the community that will get the S's on their boarding pass. It's the same thing. A lot of that has nothing to do with anything someone's done wrong. It's just someone has said something that's caused the FBI to put your name in a database. And it's nothing to be embarrassed about. You contact CARE or contact a lawyer, and there's things that we can do to try to remove those designations from the databases. And in fact, I think I said this earlier, I was placed on this list for a while. Me and an ACLU lawyer were, but in fact, it was one of the first FBI agents that we were dealing with. He determined that we were a threat, and they put us on the no-fly list. I was removed off of an airplane, and we had all kinds of fun with that afterwards because we were red hot. And we had the agent removed from the Houston area. We complained to the special agent in charge. We filed a complaint with the federal ombudsman, and we got ourselves off the list. And we got a problem agent out of town. I don't know where he's probably a problem for someone else right now. I also know that they put our letter and our complaint in the lunchroom at the FBI office, where I heard that they laughed about it quite a bit. But we can do things about this. My point is, don't be embarrassed. If it could happen to me, it can happen to anyone. It doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. It just means they're being jerks. And Billy's going to pick up here now. Yeah. The TSA in some ways is easier to deal with, because you're doing the TSA, you're inside the country, right? And so you can assert all these rights. You don't have to attend to any of it. Now you do have to submit to their section, like the patent. So the bells and whistles go off, you have to be swabbed, you have to comply with all that. But that's really all they're there for. They're there for security of the airplane for the airplane, right? So they should not be asking you these kinds of questions. And if they are, just you should tell them, I know what my rights are, I know what they are, and I'm not going to talk to you about my rights. They can't really do anything to you. They're there just to make sure that the airport is safe. What? Oh. Yeah, they can be aggressive. The problem is that what we do, if you find someone who is being aggressive and being rude and unprofessional, document it for them. It's amazing what you write down their name, write down the notification with the ABC, have to talk to the supervisor. You get that to us, and we'll go out there and have a meeting. If we have a problem, we need to keep doing it, we can have that person do it. But they need to be professional. If they have no justification to be rude or aggressive, that's too much. No, they are. The problem with TSA agents is they have to chip on it, because they're not really law enforcement, they're not police, they don't have. So they tend to have this attitude. Yeah. So you assert your rights. They have no. They're only going to be according to us. And so you notice if you didn't do it, if someone just happens like someone may have a knife or something they forgot about, they try to go for that. Yeah, they kind of the TSA finds it. The TSA doesn't arrest you. They're being called a police officer. So they don't have the authority
Well, thank you all so much, Jazakumullah khair, for staying. I really appreciate everyone doing so. We have everything that you learned today, well, not everything, because John is actually a lawyer. We have some bullet points on some flyers outside, inshallah, both on the sisters and the brothers' side. Please take one with you. We have them in Urdu, Arabic, and English, so whatever your language of preference is, we have them available. If you have any questions for us, you can contact us on any one of these 4 social medias, and those pictures are off, but you can see pretty much at Care Houston the whole way down, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you have any questions for me, I am back in the office and all by my lonesome. So if you want to come talk to me, feel free. We're on Hillcroft and Harwin, inshallah. I'll welcome you in. We got a new coffee maker for the office, and we also have chai. So ahlan wa sahlan. Jazakumullah khair. If you have any questions, you can email w-white@care.com. Inshallah, I'm happy to pass them along to our lawyer. And love to get you all involved. We have a sign-up sheet outside, inshallah, if you'd like to sign up. We have multiple opportunities. These lovely sisters here are from MIST when I presented there last week. So I told everyone, hey, come to Mariam next week, and inshallah, alhamdulillah, I'm glad to see that they're here. Please get involved with CARE. We are a community organization, so if you see something that you like about CARE, or if you would like to see something more from CARE, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to abide any and all requests as long as it's within our mission, inshallah. And I just want to say, you know, what we spoke about tonight was specifically related to civil rights. Thank you, Imam. What we spoke about tonight was specifically related to civil rights, but Allah forbid you ever go through an instance where your case is not civil rights related, you can still, by all means, reach out to us. We are connected to the Houston Muslim Bar Association, and we are connected to multiple criminal defense attorneys. Of course, John is a criminal defense attorney. To assist in any case that may come up, but we can't guarantee that they will be pro bono or at a reduced cost. But inshallah, if Allah forbid there is any instance where you need additional legal help, we're here to point you in the right direction on that as well. So,
What Billy was saying about what's important to understand, I think one of the sisters said this earlier, what we don't have an attorney is kind of full attorney. If you have a complaint or a situation that falls within our mission, meaning it is a civil rights claim, we've been profiled, we've been discriminated against, whether it's at the airport, at law enforcement, at school, if you encounter any kind of discrimination or bullying, if it falls within our mission, our job is to provide pro bono free legal assistance. So we will provide services to you and all of you. What Billy is saying is that if it doesn't fall within our mission, you can still contact us. We are connected with the Muslim Bar Association, which is on we can help you. Most of them are out there. Also, all of our contact, all of Billy's got that. You've got a bunch of new cards.
yes.
So all his cards are out there. It has the office phone number if you want the phone number to the office. We also have a incident report link on our website. If it's late at night or you want to talk to Billy for some reason, you can actually go on the website, fill out an incident report, go get stuff with Billy, and
Yeah.
then sign it down. So there's lots of ways to get in contact with us. We don't want an inability to afford a lawyer to prevent people from exercising their rights. So that's why we're providing the services for civil rights within our program. Don't be ashamed to play these contacts.
Absolutely. So I'd like to, you know, Imam will correct me on this later, but the majority opinion, we all say Ameen at the end of Al-Fatiha. I'd like for us to join in a community chant, no chai for the FBI. So 1, 2, 3, no chai for the FBI. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Jazakumullah khair. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us, and inshallah we're here to assist anyone. Thank you so much.